guest today, strictly because he epitomizes what a rhythm maker is. Whether it's in L.A., San Anselmo, down in Texas, over in Europe, with Ezra Mohawk, John Kahn, Jerry Garcia. My guest today is a rhythm maker. His responsibility with all these master musicians, whether it's B. Van Morrison or Tyrone Brown, was to swing the band or produce the album. He has seen high highs and low lows, as we all have, but he explored his own tributaries, and the ways in which he got to where he is today is remarkable. It's also a sign of passion, intelligence, eccentricity, and devotion, enlightenment as well. It's an honor to welcome Daoud Shaw to the Jake Feinberg Show. How are you, Daoud?
I'm fine. How you doing, man?
It's just so great. It's great to talk to you, man. How you feeling good today?
Yeah, I'm feeling great, man.
You know, were you always curious from a production, like with gadgets and stuff? How early did you start, like, tinkering around with production and engineering? Because you've really been pretty prolific with that during this century, but I have a feeling it started back some time ago.
It started when I was a little kid, basically. I was taking apart radios and stuff like that. I practiced drums and making radios and tinkering around, and that led on to I was the guy that always brought the tape recorder to the rehearsal or to the gig, and are making primitive demos in dark corners and so on and so forth. And, later when I got in real recording studios, and I was always the guy in the band that everybody would leave and I would stay, and ask questions. And kind of progressed like that. So by the time I got to New York City, I was hooked into production and recording and gadgets and all that stuff, and it stuck with me through the years.
I think it's, it still goes on today. What I like about it is the idea of talking to somebody who was a heavy musician, but also, took a lot of pride in those dark corners and taping, however rudimentary, because, well, you put it in your own words. What's the significance of getting this stuff on record?
Well, ultimately, in the big picture, the best music happens live, I believe.
Absolutely.
In front of an audience where everybody's interacting and there's interplay. Everybody's playing at the same time. The audience is playing at the same time. You may have preconceived notions before you hit the bandstand of what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. You're going to get your favorite lick in here. But magic happens when everybody's doing it together. Anyway, now if you can capture some of that, and at the same time, you can hear everything really well, and you got a great room sound, and the detail is there, then that is really a beautiful moment. As opposed to, we've all listened to tapes that we've recorded in clubs, on handheld tape recorder or whatever. It's wonderful because you do hear that combined magic. But, if you want to really hear what the guitar player is playing, or what the keyboard player is playing, or what the singer has changed the lyric to, you really can't hear. So I was always fascinated with the idea of, creating some magic with the audio and trying to capture the live performance vibe as much as possible.
Right, so. That would entail not plugging into the soundboard really, but just getting the audience, the feel of the audience too. I mean, I listen to a lot of that stuff, whether it's the Grateful Dead or anything else, and you listen to a soundboard, and it can be explosive and beautiful, and then you listen to a really good audience recording in the pit somewhere, and it's even more electric because
you're absolutely right. Yeah.
But I also think it has something to do with the multi-sensory stuff going on now. I was looking at like a John Lee Hooker record the other day, and there he is on a bus, and it was it was a live shot. It's like, you can never let these blues go, and there were people on the bus. It was a still shot, but there were people on the bus checking him out, and it was, nobody had their heads down, nobody was looking at their digital devices, nobody was distracted taking pictures. It was a spiritual thing, going back to what I've been covering a lot on the show, which is what music ultimately was, mystical, a healing source, and an opportunity to wash away the dust of everyday life, as Art Blakey would say. And I wonder now, I wonder how you, looking back on being part of the enclave of, with Van Morrison especially, the attention spans of the audience and how locked in and how the synergistic qualities between the audience and the band members and how electric. I was hoping you could maybe put that into words.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really special. And, and Van is an interesting case, too, because, I played everything from, outdoors, arena-style venues to stuff that, clubs that were very intimate. And the magic really happens when when you're up there, you can see the audience, you can maybe even focus in on a table, and you know that there's a communication go on, there's a hookup, and that's a beautiful thing. And you don't even have to stare at them at that table in particular, but just to know, and then you let your imagination take over, along with just being bathed in the sound that you're making and everybody else is on stage, and suddenly, you're someplace else, and there is a real communication going on, and it's magic, and I've been involved with making music and playing music for 45 years plus, and probably on my hands and toes I could count those really great magic moments that happen when it's and it is spiritual. It definitely is. It transcends where you are. It transcends yourself, because you're no longer just an ego, an individual. You're part of something else, that's being created all around you, or maybe it's coming through you, but it's hard to describe because it is a transcendental experience, Oh,
it's beautiful. No, it's true. And did you, the other thing is that, you came up during a time when I can't remember the phrase you used when we talked earlier on the phone, but it was every person was just one seat away from you, the brotherhood. Everybody kind of knew everybody else in some informal way. And but there were different tributaries and different ways of making connections. And sometimes you would just fall into a situation completely organically. And I'm wondering, when you first linked up with Van, if it was just something like that. Was it just pure coincidence, or was it something that was put together, more manufactured?
Well, it certainly wasn't manufactured, but but there were certainly all those tributaries, because there were connections of he was in the band and so played with him, and and in fact, last night I was kind of sitting back and thinking about those times. That was early '70s in Woodstock, New York, and jamming at the Cafe Espresso with my little band, and all the people that just walked in and came through, whether it was Paul Butterfield or members of his band, or and then faces I hadn't seen in years, back from Boston when I was there in the the early 60s and up to the mid 60s, suddenly, people that I had played with back in Boston started showing up there, and like Colin Tilton. Colin is a tenor saxophone player and a flute player, great player, great guy. He had played with Van on Moondance. That's the album that just prior to me hooking up with Van. So there was that connection. Even though Van was putting together a new band at that time, there was that. Jeff Labus, who also was on that record, he's also from Boston, but I had never met him in Boston, but I had met him in New York City on Bleecker Street in the late 60s, and he had a band that was signed to Atlantic.
What was the name of that band?
That band was called the Apple Pie Motherhood Band.
Oh, I mean, wait, on that was on Atlantic?
I believe so, yeah.
That's so beautiful. My gosh. Okay.
And then there was another guy, Colin Tilton, and Mike Winfield, a bass player that I knew back in Boston, again in the early to mid 60s. He was in a band they were in a band together called, the Colwell Winfield Blues Band. They were a great band, great guitarist. And they materialized in Woodstock. So, I mean, there was, it was really pretty amazing. But, the key to it for me was I always followed the music. I didn't think of anything. I mean, I would go like 3,000 miles in a minute if if there was something happening musically. I didn't have many possessions. I had my stereo, my records, a window air conditioner.
That's perfect. Yeah, exactly. You need
and
that.
And an old Sony TV. And I could fit them all into a car and go anywhere.
Well, anybody that has lived in New England, especially I lived in Allston for quite some time, and the older apartment buildings, no air conditioning, so you needed to have that window unit, which was vital. I'll tell you, when I announced that I was that you were coming up on the program, I got inundated with questions from everyone from Wall Street, people to philanthropists. I mean, and people that are. They're keeping their day job till their night job pays, but they were just so excited because they appreciate that the same kind of history, be able to talk. I think that was the point of my introduction, was just Van Morrison. Let's just take him because you're the first guy I've talked to that played a lot with him in the studio, and the first question here is, who rehearsed less? Jerry Garcia or Van Morrison?
Now that is a good question.
These are all. I mean, you wait till you hear these questions. Yeah.
Well, the common ground that they share is that they're both incredibly spontaneous people.
Yes.
And in a way, they thought over-rehearsing, at least for themselves, was not really the way to go, because they were saving their stuff up for the real thing, performance. They didn't want to get into the same way of doing things constantly. And but I will say that Jerry, I probably rehearsed more with Jerry. Working out stuff and with Van, though, I mean, I rehearsed a lot with, put it this way, with and without Van. Van would show up and rehearse, but he would leave the band to rehearse by itself.
Mm-hmm.
And, we would spend a lot of time working on tunes, working up arrangements, making adjustments. And after we did that, he would come in and spend an hour and kind of run through all the stuff, make a lot of comments. We'd make some notes, and then we'd go and rehearse again.
So he would really want you guys to get he wanted it real tight, and then he'd come in and sort of work his His
well, yeah, but you know, the odd part about that is that we could do that, and then we could hit the bandstand, and then he would make everything completely different.
Right.
You know, he was the man, and you know, whatever was necessary to inspire him to a performance, you know. I mean, he was, you know, like Jerry, you know, when we did shows, there weren't, you know, there was an elaborate stage show that went on with, you know, semis full of staging and lighting and stuff, you know. I mean, basically both of these guys loved to get up and perform, you know. They just wanted to play. And Van was the same thing, you know. I mean, Van would tell me, yeah, I'm just a side man, you know. You know, he probably equated himself, and he was a big fan of, like, Frank Sinatra in the sense of, like, you know, even in one of his songs is a line, what is it? Frank Sinatra sings to Nelson Riddle strings, then goes home and takes a vacation.
Wow, I love that.
So, you know, I mean, in a sense, he wanted it structured, but, you know, I when I was, the short time I spent as his musical director, you know, we would spend, you know, 2 hours before each gig, you know, making up an elaborate set list. And as soon as we hit the bandstand, all these set lists went flying. The sound man, the lighting guy, all their lists went up in the air, and they were just trying to follow him around the stage because it's like, he's supposed to go to the piano, and da-da-da. You know, he just picked up a saxophone. He took it right out of, you know,
right.
And, you know, or we'd play stuff in different tempos and different keys. He wanted to keep it interesting, you know. So it was always in the flux. But, you know, so in essence, they probably rehearsed an equal amount of time. But like I said, with Van, it was with and without him, you know.
Well, I mean, yeah, and it's one of those things where, you know, he would. I think that, you know, I'm not so sure about Jerry, about Van more specifically. The idea where he, just in order to motivate himself, you know, in order to provide a great performance, if he was like, you know, I'm just bored, I don't want to follow the script, and I'm just going to make sure that I surround myself with musicians that if I, you know, throw them, that they're just going to jump back on the bus as quickly as possible.
Right. Well, that's true. And the other thing about it, you know, making sure that the band was polished and the arrangements were polished, is because he knew that the tighter the band was, just like anything else, if we knew this stuff really well, then and only then can you really destroy it, you know what I mean, or mess with it and be flexible with it, because everybody feels that they're comfortable with it enough to do that. So it gave the band and him a firm, you know, a firm rooftop to leap from.
But it was in some ways, like I've talked to other drummers from like Jerry, like Greg Arico, other people like that, and they said like you get on a wave with him and then you just have to go off. But with Van, the songs were so emotive, and so it seemed like a tighter package. I mean, there's so much available from the pocket of time that Daoud Shaw was the drummer for Van Morrison, that the set lists were really pretty tight. I mean, it was and it wasn't a lot of long explore. Did you find yourself ever doing 20-minute jams, 25-minute jams, long improvisational stuff?
With him?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, for instance, the stuff that you sent me that we're going to listen to, you know, there's one track that I was just kind of floored by, because the band itself was like a fusion. It was a jazz blues band. And,
oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know, and I'm like, could Van, would he just sort of get lost, and maybe next thing you know, you look up and it's a 17-minute, you know, you've been jamming for 17 minutes live. Did that happen a lot?
It didn't happen a lot, but it did happen. It did happen.
Talk about one of those, because I like going outside of it, because the van that not even the studio stuff, but just the amount of bootlegs and stuff that I have, maybe 5 minutes, 8 minutes. I'd love to hear about a time where it was just like 20 minutes and then you guys were like, wow, I didn't realize it had gone on that long.
Well, okay. Well, let's go back to around the time of that "Too Late to Stop Now" album. I remember the tune was "Listen to the Lion."
Mm-hmm.
I love that tune, and we would get into. Especially, I'd say about 2/3 of the way through the tune, Van would just start these kind of guttural tones and kind of just, the lyrics would get, and he would just get into the sounds of the words. And and then that was one of my transcendental moments, really, I remember on that tune, because it just went off, and there was a lock. I felt like there was a lock between me, David Hayes, and him right away, and then the whole ensemble went with it, horns and all, keyboards, and I closed my eyes and just kept playing and just going and going and going, and I don't know how much time passed by, but at some point, I think we all looked around at each other, just like caught the corner of our eyes, and then moved to an arranged spot of the tune so we could at least take it to another place, But that was one of those moments, for sure. Also, we would open up shows with instrumentals too, and there were several times when the band, was basically we would jam. I mean, it's the standard format of play the head, everybody's got solos, and then back to the head and out.
Right.
And but there were several times when 8, 10, 15 minutes could have gone by on this tune, on a particular tune, and those magic moments happen. I mean, all the players had enough vocabulary and chops to, and everybody had, which is I think a sign of those times, had listened to just about everything from classical music through avant-garde jazz to R&B to blues, you name it, to sort of keep it in context, with where we were and what we were playing, and the audience as well, and so it was a beautiful thing.
I want to play in a piece of music here. This is a track that Daoud recently put together, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Okay. Sounds great, man. You guys were burning.
Yeah, that was Jack Schroer on the alto solo and Sid Page on the violin solo.
Where is Sid Page, man? I mean, I need more violinists. I love the
I know,
the guy
man.
was a smoker, man. I mean that, and then Bill Atwood. Tip my hat. He comes out with a great trumpet solo as well. It was just where did those tracks come from, and why did you decide to choose the ones you did?
Well, I mean that's an interesting story. Those tracks are really from like 1974, and they were recorded at Van's studio in San Anselmo, California. While he was out of town, I kind of usurped the studio and kind of gave, I just said, hey, let's do our tunes, and who knows, whatever. And that particular tune is a tune called Orbital Transplant. That's a tune that I wrote back in Boston in the early 60s. And let's see, the tapes, the master tapes, the 2-inch tapes, I couldn't find them anywhere, and I had a studio up in Woodstock in the late '60s and early '70s called Stone Sound, and when I went out to San Anselmo to hook up with Van when he moved out there, I sold my interest in the studio, and a lot of the tapes remain there, but somehow those tapes wound up back in that studio, and about 5 years ago, visiting old friends up there, Don Moore, who was a bass player, he bought out my studio. He said, I've got some tapes here in the back room that, have your name on them, and you might want them. And I found that master there. I had it transferred to digital, and then I remixed it here at my studio just in the past year. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of tunes that were tracked. I think there were maybe 5 tunes, and I remixed them. And
can I just ask you? Kind of blew my mind just now. Is that Don Moore, Jerry Moore's brother?
It is.
I interviewed. I had an amazing interview with Jerry back when I was on AM radio. It was like I sort of have. I don't think I've gone back to listen to it because it was so mind blowing. But those guys were Woodstock. So you really were. I didn't realize that you were there when it was peaking as a regional enclave. Really, I mean, it was really hot at that time.
Yeah, it absolutely was. I was in this band called Chrysalis. And we got signed by MGM, and this is in New York City in '67 or so.
Oh my God! I didn't know that. Keep going. This is unbelievable.
Yeah. We were an art rock band, mm-hmm. And but everybody in the village at that particular period in time, on the weekends, everybody would make their way up to Woodstock, New York. The hippies would pile up in Greyhound buses or Peter Pan bus.
Mm-hmm. I think I've taken that bus before.
Ironic, but true.
Mm-hmm.
We'd head up to Woodstock. Everybody, it was great up there. It was glorious. An old artist colony. From previous generations, and we wound up moving up there after the album was complete, and it was the classic story of we rented a house together, and we all had rooms, and we rehearsed in the living room, and used it as kind of a base for touring and gigs and stuff.
It was nice. It must have been nice. I'm not sure if you ever talked with guys like Paul Butterfield or Levon or even Bob Dylan, where it's like they must have just enjoyed being able to. Not everybody was in their face. I mean, they could
exactly.
Right, they could go into a coffee house and see you guys play, and nobody was going to suffocate them. I mean, now it's like everybody is so. I'm part of it too. I mean, there's like this rabid fascination with sort of authenticity. So you clamor for it. And back then it was just like, I'm just a regular guy. I just want to come and have a beer and watch the band. They must have loved that, you know?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And everybody did. I mean, it was mellow up there, and the surround. I mean, well, you know, that area of New York State is like magic. You know, it's got even the Indians that really own it,
right?
Considered it like a magical place in the through the Catskills and everything.
I went to a camp upstate New York for summer camp for 8 weeks at a time in Elizaville, which is only about a half hour from Woodstock itself. And the town had a fire station, a deli, and a post office, and a graveyard. And it was just like, even in the 80s when I was there in the 90s, it still was even though we used to go into the town of Woodstock, but it was nice because it just sounded like it was a bit of a zoo, but at the same time it remained calm, you know, and people still found ways you kept it alive, and the town councils and the people at B. I'll never forget this album, Muddy Waters at Woodstock. It came out on Chess, and it was like a picture of him. It looks like pre-dawn, and everybody in the town is surrounding him, including the mayor. And he's got like this plaque in his hand, you know. And I'm like, that was 1975. And
right.
And it's like, wow, maybe, these enclaves were protected, and then all of a sudden they weren't really protected. And I feel like that was, when I see that picture, I mean, I could be wrong, but it was kind of like that was the end in some ways, for it to be that small, that communal, to have a record label like Chess, be that flexible, sending Muddy Waters over there, and to get to play with guys like, John Carter and Howard Johnson and Levon. But to me, it really is these regional bastions, whether it was Boston, had its own scene, but Woodstock is different because there is no urban center. It was just like this sort of magical. Did Van live up there as well?
Oh yeah. He had moved up there right after the Moondance album, and. Again, he had a beautiful house up there, and we'd rehearse in his living room, and that was that was the spot. I mean, thinking back on it, I mean, there was just a lot of that. I remember rehearsing with Tim Hardin up there, the same thing in his home, and. Lots of other folks. It was just a very relaxed, mellow environment, and like even at that point when you came into Woodstock, it was like no big deal. Again, you could just go into a bar or a restaurant, hang out. Nobody would really bother you. But if you're a musician, you just keep running into all these people, I had lots of friends that were out of the Butterfield band, for instance, and and then we would make, like while we weren't on the road or traveling, we'd put together stuff, I had, in fact, the band, and I think Van might have seen was with Keith Johnson, trumpet player, and maybe Mike Winfield, that bass player from Colwell Winfield. People like Buzzy would come in and play. Buzzy Fightin'.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah,
no, Gene Dinwiddie and those guys.
Oh yeah. I knew Gene really well. And what became Full Moon in a few years, Freddie Beckmeyer, all those guys.
Oh my God, Phil Wilson, that's one of my favorite.
And Phil too, man.
Oh man, jeez.
Yeah, great guy.
For a lot of my friends, we look at Van, or I used to be obsessed with Van. You get videos of him in Rome somewhere playing acoustic guitar, or just him on stage at the Last Waltz kicking around. But at the core, how would you define the intangible leadership skills that made him such a good performer? It doesn't always have to be. It doesn't have to be a positive thing all the time. But what were the leadership qualities that he exhibited that allowed him to get the band to respond to him and the audience as well?
Well, Van had a lot of influences. I mean, he would tell me that, I guess like a lot of UK guys did, musicians, they had listened to armed forces radio, primarily coming out of like Germany when they were kids,
Mm-hmm.
and he listened to all the all the blues, for instance, that we never really got to hear here in the States, because there were a lot of black servicemen in like Munich, and they played. The blues were on rotation, man. So there was that, and then Van, his love of jazz as well. He was a big fan of Mose Allison and people like that. So I mean, again, he's got this broad palette of influences. His writing is incredibly eclectic, even though, you think, early Van is kind of like playing with them, Gloria and tunes like that. But as soon as, he became, quote, a singer-songwriter, and that his first, album, like Astral Weeks,
Sure.
It's incredibly deep. And he knows what he wants. He has a hard time explaining it sometimes, and but he's always had the judgment to have good musical directors and people that could translate that into finding players. He'd also he'd be able to find players himself. He'd go to clubs and hear a whole band, and then just say, "Gee, I might want to do a project with them," with that kind of thing.
So the flexibility was fantastic as well.
And I had been used to playing R&B, back in Boston, and playing lots of R&B cover bands, and even there, a lot of the front men, the leaders out in front, a lot of stuff was never said. Nobody ever turned around and said da 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 da. There were gestures, hand gestures, movements, and you would just know. He wants to take the music here. Dynamics. Another kind of lost art for a lot of bands, What do you mean we don't have dynamics? I'm playing as loud as I can, But, with one movement of his arm behind him, I knew that the whole thing was going to come down from a scream to a whisper, just instantaneously. And, I mean, that's a dramatic thing when it happens correctly, and it has a lot of, the absence of sound is as powerful as, 8 million watts.
I mean, here's another question coming across the wire here. Okay, it says, how did Shaw and his then wife, Ezra Mohawk, come to co-write Haze for the first Bobby and the Midnights album?
Wow. Well, now we're jumping ahead to.
Well, there's so much to get to, but I mean, these are questions. When I saw them, I said, I didn't know that. I'm going to ask Daoud.
Well, I have to say truthfully, I think that when Esther and I hooked up, that was in L.A. and that's in the late '70s. We would just. I mean, she's an incredible songwriter, always has been, and a great singer. And, I don't know how much I contributed to that, but it might have been just a little bit here and there, but not much. I mean, I have to say that Esra is very generous with that stuff, because it's like I help songwriters all the time here at the studio. I'll say, this doesn't sing well. Let's change this line, or this is what you really mean here, and we'll kind of play with that. And nobody ever gives me a writing credit,
Mm-hmm.
but certainly she did,
What is that? What does that say to you about today? I mean, there's a lack of acknowledgement. What does that mean? I mean, is it just a values thing, or is it just? I mean, we're talking about younger musicians that are oblivious to the fact that people deserve.
Well, you know what, Jake? This is traditional, man.
Mm-hmm.
It's like songwriters and artists have been screwed, because nobody understands the big picture in the music business. The big picture, really, going back maybe 300 or so years ago, is it's really all about publishing. Music publishing is where all the money is in the music business. That's why, through, when the record companies were powerful, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, traditionally, the standard agreement for an artist or a band signing anything with a label is, we're going to take half of your publishing,
Right.
But that's okay, because you're still going to get the writer's share. You're going to get 100% of the writer's share, and we're going to take the publisher's share. Well, I mean, that's bogus to begin with, because there is just one share, and suddenly they have half of everything.
Right. I mean, and they put absolutely zero creativity into the production of it. And
that, if anything, now,
yeah.
There's a bigger problem, and that is, the lack of any rights for the artist or for a publisher or for anybody, but mainly for the artist now, because even though a lot of those traditional music business, the companies and the labels, they're like mega corporations. They're really not interested in creative artists. They're interested in packaging entertainment, So
no, I think you just hit on something very important, because it was. I just feel that there were people, scouts, talent, that were looking for artists, creative artists, and now it's more like, well, we're just, how can we brand this person? So therefore, you just so that you can make people sort of. Although it's interesting that you say, I'll hear a lot of people say, well, now there's a lot of people that are just going to take it in the direction of they can have their own independent label, and they have more flexibility, more autonomy. But it seemed to me, just with my collecting of records, that, there were a plethora of labels, and there were a lot of producers and a lot of people that were running this stuff that really understood to get out of the way of these geniuses. And that's where the music would come from. Whereas today, you're saying that there's actually more restrictions, less rights for the artists themselves.
Well, I'm saying that. Well, first of all, I agree with you 100% that I really do miss labels, or record labels, in the sense of that all the big labels were all started basically, with some exceptions, by people who really, really, truly loved music. And they were the presidents of the companies. People like Ahmet Ertegun and on and on and on and on.
Norman Granz, all these guys. Yeah.
I mean, they really loved music, and they didn't even think of like, am I screwing anybody? Because that was just the way business was. I mean, again, it's sort of like when people look at discrimination back then too. It was like, well, yeah, there were some people that were outright bigots or outright thieves, looking at the music business, but that was just what their lawyers told them. Well, you get this and this, and you try and get as much as you can, but so on and so forth. And that I miss. The problem now is that, with the internet and stuff being able to be so duplicated and reused. There's a generation of kids that think that they should just be able to have and use anything that's out there in some kind of collective consciousness. Not thinking of all the labor that some of these artists put into writing music or creating it. All the dues they had to pay to create this thing of beauty that you finally listen to, and then just thinking, oh, I can have it, I can distribute it, I can sell it, I can change it around and make it mine,
Mm-hmm. Or maybe it sounds like crap, but with the new technology, they can change it in a heartbeat without having. I mean, you guys did multiple takes over, until you. I don't want to. Here's the other thing: is that there were guys like Oscar Peterson or even Norman Granz or. There were other cats as well. Their philosophy was like, I don't care if this sells $20 records or 2,000 records, but this music is what my label stands for. So
correct.
And that to me was emboldening because you're saying, okay, now we're equating the music and the art to the company itself. Whereas now it's just strictly a profit-based thing. There's no interest or understanding of the music. Just put in the digital loops, get this sexy voice on there, put some lyrics in, we'll package it, and then we'll put it on iTunes for 99 cents. And and coupled with the fact that you're looking at younger generations that are just not don't have the choices. They don't have the record stores or the bookstores or the spontaneity of being able to go to see, just all of a sudden see a sitar with a tambora and a conga drum and then all this. It's I don't want to oversimplify it, but that's what you went through. I mean, you went through that process, and that's why I do, and that's why I talk to you guys, because I just think it's essential for younger musicians. Some of them get it, some of them try to do their own individual work, but they're up against a different beast now. It's really a corporate thing. It's not about art at all.
Yeah, I don't think so. Well, there are aspects of art about it, but it so much of it is cookie cutter creations. That's it's like connecting the dots as opposed to creating something from scratch yourself. It's like getting a kit to it's like when I was a kid, we used to get these, watercolor kits or whatever, sure. And all you do is like, okay, fill in area 17 with this color, You didn't even know what you were doing until, 3 weeks after you finished it, you walked in the room and said, oh, wow, that's a landscape. Well, it's kind of, it feels like that, a lot of that goes on now, except it's probably a little bit more deterministic by people that just want to, this is a successful element. This one always works. Let's take this drum loop and put it up with this, and then, oh, that's almost right. Now let's process this vocal through auto-tune 2 octaves lower, and and then you got something da-da-da-da-da. It's sort of like assembly line kind of music as opposed to a craftsman working on something by themselves. When I say by themselves, because I mean it doesn't have to be one person, but it could be a band or a collective or a group of musicians, that's the world I grew up in, and I do run into young bands that have that, and it's refreshing, and I love it, and I love to work with them. I love to help them.
No, it's great.
I find that.
Well, I mean, you guys are the lineage, and the fact that you have the chops and the know-all, and you've been a musical director and a drummer. It's it's vital. And actually, I just I wanted to play another clip of music. I came across this. This was a remastered cassette, a Gems cassette, mastered by Jameson Waddell locally here in Tucson. So we'll listen to this and we'll come back and talk about it.
Okay, cool.
So lonesome and alone, way from home. I've never been lonesome and alone, way from home.
1981, Daoud Shaw on drums, Liz Stiers and Ezra Mohawk on vocals, and Jerry Garcia. And there were times, Daoud, during your tenure with Jerry where John Kahn was not available, and actually you got a chance to play with Phil on several occasions.
Yeah, and boy, that track is smoking.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, exactly. And that was, I mean, there's a cat down here very devoted to preservation, and he found this. Well, he always gets boxes of analog cassettes from other heads, and he turned that thing into kind of a muddy, and brought a lot of brightness to it. And when I was listening to it, I was like, wow, because it's great, man.
Hook me up with him. I'd certainly love to get a copy of that.
Oh, I'll give it. I'll send you a copy. No, I got it. It's funny, to be honest with you. When I was listening through, I mean, you were. It's really interesting. You were the drummer from essentially January of '81 through the summer of '81, and at the end of the summer, and I listened to a lot of that, and it's amazing because you guys did a long spring tour, and there's a lot of drawn out, very slow songs, Knocking on Heaven's Door, 17 minutes long,
Right.
Simple Twist of Fate. And I don't want to get into the whole drugs thing, but it was like, you can hear it was so slow. And then I listened to this and I'm like, wow, they're smoking hot. That was just blazingly hot. And so, here's the thing. How did you even link with Jerry and John Kahn to begin with? How did that happen?
Well, I had known John, I think, through the years. In fact, it might have even been in Woodstock when he was up there with
Butterfield. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's 70, 71 or something like that. And we ran across each other, and he was a smoking bass player, and it's like bass players and drummers always have that thing, it's like click, and you just said, there's a guy, we should do something together, or we will do something together, just a matter of, who'll put that together, And, I think then I had ran across him again in, I guess probably when I was out in San Anselmo in, 72 to 74 slot.
Because probably
74.
Like I know there are shows of like Merle Saunders and Jerry and John from that the Lion's Share. So you probably ran across them there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. My little band would play at the Lion's Share, and there was again, the musician community in that area, it was just the grapevine was popping at all times.
It's just so the grapevine. it was they were harvesting grapes for wine and everybody
and
was
music.
But John was a devotee. He was such a. You look at the way his thought process was. He was rooted. I remember talking to Bob Jones, the drummer from We Five, and he talked about. John. The truth is, John wanted to be the next Scott LaFaro, and they all wanted to be junkies like Thelonious Monk. It's like, and I'm just trying to figure. He was such an enigma in some ways, but clearly a brilliant guy, and it's nice to know that you guys clicked because. The intro to my show is Woody Shaw, Dizzy Gillespie, Sonship, and John Kahn, and he's been with me through this journey because I would have loved to have hung out with that cat. Yeah.
Well, he would have loved to have hung out with you too, man. That's for sure.
Tell me about so in like 80, how did the singers get you? It was interesting because it went from Donna Godchow and Keith Godchow, and Maria Moldauer was involved with John Kahn, and then they left, and then Liz Stiers, who I think was involved with Jimmy Warren, and then Ezra was your wife at the time. How did was it just a logical thing? They're like, okay, we had these couples before, let's do it again,
Yeah, I think that was kind of it. It was just like, so much of music is like, to me anyway, and I guess to a lot of us, is like puzzle pieces. There's some dream band you might have in your head of like, I get this guy from Belgium and so from New York and wouldn't that be great chemistry? But then again, that only exists in your head, and the reality of the situation is that if there are elements at hand, and sometimes you just throw them into the gumbo, all kinds of like magic happens.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what really went on. Let's see. Right around that time, I was playing with Etta James.
Were you really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
and I did a bunch of touring with Etta. Again, and that came about through Freddie Beckmeyer. Again, a bass player that was with Paul, Full Moon, and him and his brother had put together a band called the Beckmeyer Brothers, and they were signed to Casablanca Records.
Sure.
So I became part of that band. We did a record, and then. But Freddie had been playing with Etta kind of on and off for the last few years, up and there in L.A. And there was a spot opened, and suddenly I was playing with Etta, and we're playing up and down the West Coast, just doing little clubs and bars and you name it. And at the same time, we opened for the Rolling Stones.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's so great. Keep going.
And and then we'd head out every once in a while. We'd head to Chicago and or New York City, and play at the bitter end. I guess maybe it was the other end at that time, and. Keith Richards would come in and play with us and sit in. So there was that connection. And
did you get a call from like Rock Scully, or how did you find out that they needed a drummer?
Yeah, I think I got a call from Rock, and I showed up, and at that time, I think Esther and I were living together. Maybe we had just gotten married. I'm not sure. And it was a logical piece. It's like, she was in L.A. We actually had. I was helping her with her band too, and I was playing with her, and we were doing local gigs there as well. So it all kind of just fall together as far as her, coming into into Jerry's project. It was, well, she's right here. So why don't you sing? Okay, bam. Hey, that worked okay. And she knew parts. She knows harmonies. She knows how to create parts. So it just it fell together. But yeah, I spent a day recording. I guess not recording, but rehearsing in San Rafael, and everything worked out. And we did extensive rehearsals, and then started doing stuff locally in and around town, and then we headed out.
Well, you took a massive monster spring tour in Upper Darby and all these classic, the Passaic, the Capitol Theater in Passaic, which was, they showed pornographic films by day, and then at night, John Sherwood put out
pornographic music by night.
Pornographic music by night. But you did you? I mean, I've talked to Melvin Seals, and I've talked to a lot of David Grisman, and I try to speak to as many guys that collaborated with Jerry, but. Were you guys, did you find yourself on these road trips spending time, like, enlightening each other? I mean, he must have been fascinated about your time with Van, and were you able to talk about stories, or was it really you went your separate ways? Because he could be a recluse as well.
Yeah, well, it was, I'm trying to, Jerry was kind of like the caveman, I remember. He really stayed to himself, and didn't really, hang out with the band too much, So, a lot of that stuff was like on a bus, which was kind of cool. I enjoyed that. To tell you the truth, a lot of my touring with Van, we never really saw a bus much. It was like limos and planes and stuff.
Sure.
But, it was kind of nice on the bus, and we just, the standard stuff of playing cards and or looking in the back. I remember looking out the back window and seeing this caravan of people which really amazed me at the time, because I had heard about Deadheads and so on and so forth, but I noticed that, like, for instance, when we were back east, that I kept seeing the same faces at all the shows. And then finally, I think I walked to the back of the bus and I looked out the back window and I saw this caravan of, like 30 cars. And, they were all, it was the same people. They would kind of just follow the bus, man, and make it to, the next town. They'd disappear and then they'd materialize at the show that night,
It's it was and just for some closure, what happened why did that band not continue? I mean, it seemed like, especially those late summer shows like the one we just heard, it was, I mean, first of all, there's another track called Tough Mama, and that you guys were trying to experiment and figure things out, but how did it dissolve? How come it didn't continue?
Well, I knew right from the get-go. Ron was Jerry's usual drummer for this stuff. He was doing, I think he was actually out on tour with Elvis at the time.
That's
or somebody.
Right.
And so, I didn't look at it as like, you're gonna be in this band. I looked at it as, okay, I'm going to do a tour with the band, and that's going to be it for me. So I never had any, hopes or aspirations of it going any further than doing the tour.
Wow, interesting. And the other thing is that a lot of this is fascinating because for Deadheads is that Phil Lesh was the bass player for the Grateful Dead, and he never played bass except in '81. When he played a couple of gigs with you. Do you have any memories of playing with? Because I mean, you listen to Phil's playing. That's the reason that Gems track is so great is because you can really hear Phil. Sometimes he's a little bit muddier, but do you have any memories? Because that's an anomaly in Dead history, really.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, hearing the track, just, kind of actually flashed some memories of that. And I'm not sure, I remember him materializing somewhere in the tour and him, playing with the band. But I remember I was pumped because, the energy thing, just felt so great, and I love that, I love the way he played, and I think we just caught some stuff, man, and like, maybe it pumped us both, and that just, took the stuff to a different direction completely.
Well, I'm mailing you the entire set.
Oh, great!
To that
man.
tomorrow. But I just
love that.
My another email just came across here. You played the first 2 seasons with the Saturday Night Live band with Paul Schaefer.
Yeah. I like 75 to rather 80, 75 to
77 or so.
77. Yeah.
Break that down a little bit. That's unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, again, after now we're going back in time.
Rewinding, fast forward.
Yeah. Now we're rewinding, fast forward to. After my stint with Van in San Anselmo, I moved back east to New York City, and I hooked up with, like I said, I had a studio in Woodstock, New York. Anyway, one of the projects that I did there was a singer-songwriter named Steve Satin. Steve, while I was in California, got signed to Columbia. In fact, John Hammond signed him.
Another unsung hero, another guy. Another appreciator.
One of those great guys.
Right.
And and was on the basis of the tracks that we did at my studio. So when I got back to New York City, I'm like, gee, let me get a gig happening here. And Steve called me and said, well, I got a record out. David Spinoza produced it, and I'm doing gigs. So I hooked up with him. And, we played a lot in New York City and New Jersey, and we were playing at the bitter end in New York, and we're opening for Martin Mull, like a week of Martin Mull.
Mm-hmm.
And about 3 nights in, after our set, this guy calls me over to the table, and it's Howard Shore. He's the musical director for Saturday Night Live. And it's like, midsummer, and he said, I really like the way you play. I'm doing this TV show in the fall, and, why don't you come up to 30 Rock tomorrow, and, if you're interested, we'll talk about it. So I went up there the next day, and I walk into his office, and who do I see is Howard Johnson. Now Howard Johnson I knew from Woodstock.
Absolutely, dude. I love Howard so much.
Yeah, great guy.
Such a great guy.
And so we get to talking, and so on and so forth, and I had gone to Berkeley. It was Berkeley School of Music when I went there, and I studied with Alan Dawson. Anyway,
wow, I see. This is wow.
And Howard was there too around those same years, I think. Howard, I don't know if you know it. I mean, he's a film composer now. You may know.
I had no idea that. No.
Yeah. All those Hobbit movies and everything. He's the guy that composed all the music.
We're talking about the Barry Sax tuba player, Howard Johnson?
No, we're talking about Howard Shore.
Howard Shore. Okay, Howard Shore.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, continue.
And he was he's a saxophone player. Basically another kind of jazz cat gone wrong, and had a band called Lighthouse in Canada. That was a band that was sort of like Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
I'm still looking to get a hold of Skip Propek. I love that cat, dude, because he was out there with Butterfield and Kahn way back when.
Lighthouse
is an interesting. That was a melting pot, but yeah. So right.
Well, anyway, I left after meeting with him, and so I just went home and I said, I'll never get this thing in a million years. First of all, I'm like, I'm just back in New York City. I haven't really lived in New York City since the '60s. This is like '75. Anyway. Skip to a couple months, I get this call from Radio Registry in New York, which is kind of like an answering service for musicians and stuff. And it's like, be at 30 Rockefeller Plaza Friday. We start rehearsing for Saturday Night Live, So I got this gig, and there I am, man. And, it's a great band, Lou Marini and Tom Malone.
Oh my God, this is
Burt
so
Jones on
classic.
guitar.
Oh my God.
And Bob Cranshaw is the bass player. He's like one of my jazz idols.
Dude, Bob Crenshaw was with Joe Raposo for 30 years in Sesame Street. I mean, it was just it was it was just an open-mindedness. It wasn't. Crenshaw is a little bit of an exception to the rule, but that's the other part of it I hear is that people say, well, I can only they don't have the repertoire now, and also they only want to play a certain type of idiom where where before it was just open. Okay, we're just going to play. Let's just play. And Crenshaw epitomizes that. I didn't realize he was the bass player on the original Saturday Night Live band.
The original Saturday Night, man.
So it was Lou Marini, Bones Malone, Hojo, and you, were guys like Duck Dunn and Booker T showing up to sit in?
Well, people would just show up. That's for sure. But the basic band was let me see here.
Well, you don't have to stretch it. The point is that and Schaefer was on piano.
Yeah, Schaefer was on piano, and Cheryl Hardwick was actually Cheryl was on piano, and Schaefer was on B3 on Hammond.
Jesus, what happened to the? That is just. Is there? Did you tape recordings of the shows?
I may have those. I probably have to fight about that with Lauren Michaels for those rights.
Oh boy, that's a big fight. That's a fight. That's a fight right there.
But I know I do have. I know I have some. I have some Saturday night band stuff stashed away. That rehearsals that we played, and I also play with Howard's band during that time too. He had a band called Gravity.
You played on Did you play on the record? No,
I didn't play on the record, but I did gigs with him.
Daoud,
and Paul Schaefer was on some of those as well.
I would like to do a part 2 with you because there's just way too much that we did not cover. But in my remaining minutes, there have been tributaries and rivers and regional scenes, and we talked about Woodstock a lot. But the city of brotherly love for me, everyone from Pat Martino to I know you're kind of on the border there, and I have so many beautiful people in that town. One of them is a guy you did a lot of production for as a bass player, Tyrone Brown. I was just hoping you could talk about his significance to music and what an understated and class act. I mean, you've had an opportunity to work with this guy, and just spend a little time talking about him if you would.
Yeah, man. Ty, if I may
right.
call him Ty, is like, he's just a special man. He's got the biggest heart in the world, first of all. The way he takes in, like younger players, other artists, and works with them, helps them out, is a beautiful thing. We've done at least 4 albums together of his music, and he is a class act all the way.
Did you ever get a chance to see him in Catalyst back? No,
I never did.
Mm-hmm.
I just that was like a little bit before my time here in Philly. But I've heard lots of that stuff, and it's just it's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, again, now there's a guy that's just like maybe one notch older than my generation, but not much. But who's got such an incredibly broad range of expression. I like to say he's got big ears. It stretches from his playing with everybody from like Max Roach to through Catalyst. It's mind-boggling, and then he's got his whole other thing, of his compositions, his arranging style. I can't wait to work on the next project with him.
Well, it's just great that you guys are. One day I'm going to head down to the studio when I'm back east, and we can grab a beer and hang out.
That'd be great.
Man, Daoud, we got a lot more to get to, but for now, we're going to wrap up this chapter. I can't thank you enough for spending the time with me today.
Well, thank you, man. Thank you. Thank you for letting out, giving people the word, and letting them know about all this stuff that's going on. You're a treasure yourself, man. Keep up the good work.
Much love, Daoud, and we'll talk to you soon. Okay.
All right, later.
This is the Jake Feinberg Show, and we'll see you all in a little bit.